History has shown us something uncomfortable and sadly consistent. Institutions don't usually fail because the people inside them are evil. They fail because incentives slowly replace judgment. We saw this in the 2008 housing collapse. Banks didn't just wake up one day and decide to destroy the economy. They were rewarded for volume, not prudence. Risk became someone else's problem. And once the machine was moving, no one knew how to stop it until it crashed. We've seen the same pattern in civil asset forfeiture, where police departments were allowed to fund themselves by seizing property. The incentive wasn't corruption, it was permission. And permission, when paired with money, always leads to overreach. The Joy Zuraff case, like the thousands of others like it, is no exception. It's not really a story of bad individuals, although it's hard not to think that when you have people like this showing up to take your kids. But this really is a story about what happens when systems are rewarded for intervention rather than restraint.
The court finds that there's a continuing danger to the physical health and safety of this child, and it would be contrary to welfare to return the child to the parents alone.
Under Title IV-E, what do you train your workers about how the state gets its money in relation to the work they do for your agency? What do you teach them?
For the Title IV-E funding, that's
Yes.
correct, but I don't know about the other grants and all of that stuff.
Okay, the only thing we're talking about right now is the exhibit that's in front of you, Title IV-E funding. In order to qualify for Title IV-E funding, you train your workers that they must remove that child from the home. That's the first step, right?
Yes.
Then the second step you train your workers is that they must obtain from the court an order that says continuation in the home is contrary to the best interest of the child, correct?
Correct.
And you teach them this. If they don't follow those two steps, your agency does not get the money under Title IV-E, correct?
Correct.
And the most dangerous systems are not the ones driven by cruelty, but the ones driven by metrics, funding, and self-preservation. This is why cases like Joy Zuraff's matter so much. Because when a system is designed in a way that rewards intervention, prolongs involvement, and rarely penalizes overreach, the damage doesn't show up all at once. It shows up one family at a time, quietly, behind closed courtroom doors, until something finally breaks through the surface. The Joy Zuraff case feels like one of those moments. If you haven't been following the Joy Zuraff case, I highly suggest that you check out my previous podcast where I dedicated an entire episode on it. But the Reader's Digest version is that Joy Zuraff is a Florida mother who has been separated from her daughter Kenlee for nearly 2 years. Florida DCF, which stands for the Department of Children and Families, took her 5-year-old daughter Kenlee, who suffers from cystic fibrosis. The removal happened after Joy questioned a medication that now has a black box warning. The state, through the Department of Children and Family Services, has been pursuing for almost 2 years now termination of Joy's parental rights, the most extreme action a government can take against a family. This case has raised serious concerns for many people watching it. The body cam footage that went viral in late January shocked the nation and started a conversation about DCF agency conduct and legalities when it comes to the sensitive nature surrounding child removals. Not that no child should never have to be removed from their biological parents to be protected. Of course, there are cases where that should happen. But there are still too many unanswered questions about process, proportionality, and whether the system itself has lost its ability to reassess when it's gone too far. After the February 9th hearing, I am hopeful that the veil that has shielded agencies like the DCF and the hidden family court system in which they operate for decades is finally being lifted, and transparency, accountability, and justice may finally be on the horizon, not just for Joy, but for the thousands of parents like her. There was a major update that came about before Monday's hearing, and that involved the firing of DCF worker Denise Kenlee, the one that was infamously grinning from ear to ear as she watched a family be torn apart. It turns out Denise was the only remaining worker involved in Kenlee's removal who was still employed by the DCF. She was reportedly fired from DCF after that body cam footage went viral. So rest assured, our outrage over this case is being heard. Unfortunately, though, Governor Ron DeSantis has continued to stay mute on this topic, having only his spokesperson give out a single statement weeks ago supporting the DCF's position on this case. So we still need to keep the pressure on Governor DeSantis to do something about this, because he actually does have authority, total authority over the DCF, and he could actually end this entire thing with a phone call. Just FYI. So the February 9th hearing was actually expected to be a very pivotal moment. It was going to be either a decisive termination of Joy's rights or a retention with the hopes of a reunification process beginning. But instead of a ruling, the court has now continued the case until April 23rd. On the outside, it was a disappointment to see this case drag on, once again, for another 3 months. That's 3 months of continued separation from a mother and her daughter. 3 more months of anxiety and wondering and waiting. And on its own, a continuance doesn't mean much. But what happened in that courtroom on Monday absolutely does. And believe me, it's a game changer. It turns out there were some visitors who attended the court hearing on Monday. 2 sitting Florida state senators, Senator Don Gaetz and Senator Jason Pizzo, were in attendance. And what's remarkable is this happened during an active legislative session in Florida, when lawmakers are normally in Tallahassee. What is also interesting is that Senator Don Gaetz is a Republican and Senator Jason Pizzo is a Democrat. So the fact that Joy's case has drawn bipartisan interest is not only huge, but the fact that these senators were there at all is a big deal and completely changes the landscape of this case. Let me be clear, sitting legislators do not attend trial court hearings casually. They especially don't miss session days, appear en masse, and attach themselves to live dependency proceedings. Dependency cases are usually closed. They're highly sensitive, they're handled daily by judges without outside observers, and not where elected officials normally appear. In fact, many family law attorneys will practice their entire careers without ever seeing this once. So the fact that this happened is extraordinary. It signals concern that goes beyond just a single family. It signals agency conduct, systemic failure, due process, potential legislative oversight consequences. This is no longer just a question of, is Joy Zuroff a fit parent? It's now become, did the system behave lawfully, competently, and constitutionally? And I want to make something else clear. When legislators show up to a trial court hearing like this, it doesn't mean they're telling a judge how to rule. It means that they're watching how a state agency is exercising its power. So according to Joy's spokesperson, Jessica Prescott, it does appear that the April continuances may have been scheduled in part so that these lawmakers can attend the next hearing as well, when they are out of legislative session. If that's accurate, this case is no longer just a custody dispute. It has now moved into what very much looks like an oversight situation. And this oversight changes everything. It means that the legislature is watching how the executive branch, in this case the DCF, is operating. It means that the judiciary now knows it is being observed as well. And DCF credibility is now on trial alongside the mother. This doesn't guarantee reunification, and it doesn't guarantee a quick resolution, but it does raise the cost of an irreversible decision like a termination of a parent's rights. So now here is the frustrating consequence of all of this. Under scrutiny, courts tend to move much more cautiously. And what that means in layman's terms is everything is slowed down. Agencies are required to justify themselves more carefully, and permanent actions like termination of a parent's rights now become much harder to defend unless the evidence is overwhelming and clean. So in other words, this doesn't accelerate justice, but it will prevent irreversible injustice. So for Joy, this is a huge win, even though it doesn't feel like it. So this again is where incentives matter. When a system operates without sunlight, momentum replaces reflection, decisions stack, narratives harden, and separation itself becomes the justification for more separation. But when attention arrives, when outside eyes start asking questions, systems are forced to slow down and explain themselves. And historically, that is when reform begins. What makes this case different is not just Joy and it's not just her daughter. It's the fact that people across the country are watching and recognizing a pattern that they have seen before in policing, in banking, in healthcare, in education. The pattern is this: When institutions are rewarded for expansion instead of restraint, harm doesn't look dramatic at first. It looks procedural. It looks bureaucratic. It looks like policy, until enough people say, stop, explain this. So how does this affect the case going forward? Well, for one, TPR, or the termination of parental rights, has just become even harder. Under legislative observation, terminating a parental's rights becomes radioactive. Agency shortcuts become dangerous, weak evidence becomes embarrassing, misconduct becomes actionable, and judges do not want to be the branch that greenlights a permanent harm while lawmakers are asking, how did this happen? Expect procedural caution, not dramatic rulings. We're probably not going to see sudden reunification orders, as hard as that sounds. We're not going to see any fiery bench speeches or overt rebukes, at least not yet. But what we will see is careful rulings, methodological handling, record building, insistence on clean process. We're going to see an increased burden on the DCF to justify every move. This, sadly, is an attempt to insulate the court from scrutiny. As for the DCF, they now are under two kinds of pressure. They're no longer just answering to the court. They're potentially answering to legislative committees, oversight inquiries, future hearings, internal audits, public funding scrutiny. Agencies under that kind of watch tend to soften their positions. They want to avoid irreversible actions like TPR. They become less aggressive and, hopefully for Joy's case, push for middle ground outcomes. Again, all of this favors non-termination. Was the continuance on Monday a win for Joy? Yes, in terms of protection of her parental rights. But when it comes to reunification, it will not be fast enough for her, unfortunately. And that is indeed the most frustrating aspect of all of this. But I do think that Joy understood a long time ago when this first began that she was in this for the long haul, and she has proven that. She's proven that with patience and perseverance and cooperation with the process, it almost always rules in the parent's favor in the end. If this case continues to draw legislative, legal, and public scrutiny, and I pray that it does, it has the potential to force uncomfortable but necessary questions. How are child welfare agencies funded? What metrics actually define success? How long can the state intervene without proving progress? And who is accountable when separation becomes prolonged without resolution? These are basic questions that no system or institution should be afraid of answering. No institution should be afraid of transparency, and no agency should need silence in order to function. That is precisely why cases like Joy's have been allowed to go on for decades. The moment a system requires families to suffer quietly in order to preserve its authority, that's the moment when reform becomes inevitable. And whether or not Joy Zuraff's case becomes that turning point remains to be seen. But the fact that lawmakers are now paying attention tells us one thing for certain. This story is no longer staying in the dark. And that is precisely why we need to take advantage of this opportunity now. I say this as someone who is equally frustrated by this case, someone who just wants to see this little girl go home. But I don't want that anger or frustration to cloud our ability to see what is happening right now before us. Instead, we have to channel that anger and frustration into action. We cannot let this case die. This case has now shifted into oversight territory. This never happens. It's a pivotal moment that we can use to push a national legislative conversation about the state of the child welfare systems in our country and the need to reform it on every level in every state. The most important thing right now is to seek accountability, and we have to do that responsibly. More than anything, I do not want to do or encourage anyone to do anything that can hurt Joy's chances of getting her daughter back. So this means the best way to help is to direct our concerns to the places designed to oversee power, not the courtroom itself. So if you live in Florida, consider respectively contacting your state legislators and asking what oversight exists for child welfare agencies. how long children can legally remain separated from parents without resolution, and what safeguards are in place to prevent prolonged cases from becoming the norm. And it wouldn't hurt to give Governor Ron DeSantis a call. Seriously, keep calling him until he does something about this, because he, with one phone call, could stop all of this. If you live outside Florida, this still matters. Every state has a child welfare system with enormous authority and very little public visibility. Asking questions locally is how reform begins nationally. Call your state legislators, your governors, demand audits on DCF and CPS agencies, the court systems, and the judges who oversee these cases. If you're a Joy Zuraff yourself, use this case to amplify your own story. You can also support responsible journalism, not rumor, not rage, but verified reporting that examines process, funding, and incentives. I, for one, highly recommend you follow Ryan Mata on X. He has many films to watch for free all about the child protective services industry, the most recent being Never in America, as well as child trafficking. And finally, I ask you to pray. Please pray for Kenlee and the thousands of children out there like her. For 2 years, she has gone to bed without her mother's arms around her. For 2 years, a mother has lived in a suspended reality. Birthdays missed, holidays fractured, bedtime songs sung through supervised visits and scheduled calls. But yet the bond remains, and that alone says something. Because systems can control access. They can regulate visits. They can write reports and file motions. But they cannot manufacture love. And they cannot extinguish it when it's real. If reunification happens, and I am praying it does, it won't just be a legal decision. It will be a reminder that persistence matters. The truth eventually surfaces, and that is why we have to fight so hard for it. Institutions are not infallible, and oversight matters. And if it doesn't happen immediately, then this case still stands for something important. A light has now shined on an institution that usually operates in the dark. As Joy said herself in a message to all of us just last week, sunlight is the best disinfectant. That will about do it for this week's episode. I would really appreciate if you would please like and subscribe to my channel for more content. God bless you all, and I hope to see you all again next time.